G20 finance ministers and central bank governors are set to meet to discuss ways to ease the economic impact of the coronavirus. The talks come 24 hours after the International Monetary Fund predicted that the world is likely to see its worst recession since the Great Depression. At top of the agenda is likely to be a temporary debt relief for the world's poorest countries. An estimated $20 billion of debt payments by 76 countries are expected to be eligible for suspension. It's a move already supported by G7 leaders.
このウイルスの世界的な感染拡大に対しては、国際的に協調して早期収拾に取り組むというために、経済活動への影響を可能な限り緩和しつつ、その後の力強い回復の基盤を整えておくことが重要と。このため G7 各国で引き続き足並みを揃えて対応していくということで意見の一致が見られたところです。
French President Emmanuel Macron has also urged the G20 to approve the proposed debt moratorium. He says it would be an essential step for African economies. Now, a closer look now at the G20 talks with Professor Randall Kroszner. He is the Deputy Dean and Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Thanks, Professor, for joining us. Firstly, this proposed debt relief by G20 countries, is it unprecedented? What can struggling economies expect from it?
I think it's very important that it be done at this point because, of course, those countries are struggling. They need to reallocate those payments to health. That is good not only for those economies, but also for the world economy and also for world health. So I think it makes a lot of sense to do something like this. This is very rarely done.
Professor, how crucial is it at this stage to have coordinated policies to tackle the economic fallout from COVID-19? And what would this concerted response look like?
I think one of the most important things internationally is really to collect data and do lots of testing, collect the data to see where the hotspots are, and to try to mitigate those and focus resources where the problems are. Without the data, without the testing, it's very hard to know, and so these broad brush policies of lockdowns or travel bans are taken. If you have the data and you have the testing, then you don't need to do that, and there's less of a negative impact globally. It's also better for global health.
Well, central banks have been aggressively easing monetary policies and buying government bonds. What's still missing in your view?
So they've done a lot, and they're going to be doing even more. I mean, for example, the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to do direct lending for small and medium-sized enterprise. I had been a governor of the Federal Reserve from 2006 to 2009 during the global financial crisis. We did a lot of new programs, but we never did something like that. I think one of the things we really need to realize is that central banks can only do so much. They can't cure the virus. They can't repair broken supply chains. What they can do is try to prevent a financial crisis so that these real shocks to health and to the supply side of the economy don't turn into a broader financial crisis. But really they need to provide the foundation for revival once the lockdowns and once the different restrictions come off.
Well, then let's look at the emerging economies. You know, what can they do to mitigate further fallout in the aftermath of the pandemic then?
So I think it goes back to the testing and the data, because if they can do enough testing, if they get the data, they can then just make sure to have lockdowns or restrictions only on certain sectors of the economy or certain areas rather than the entire economy. And so I think that's one of the key things. And then obviously they need to as much as possible, both get aid in and invest in healthcare. And in particular, protect the healthcare workers, doing testing for them and making sure they have the equipment. Because that's actually very important for the economy, for getting the economy restarted, and also for protecting people's lives and livelihoods.
Well, speaking of getting the economies restarted, what are the trade-offs in easing lockdowns and reopening the economy too soon?
So we have to think about it. I think the best way to think about it is think of them together rather than being a trade-off of one versus the other. After the initial lockdowns, what you want to do is try to get people back to work, back to production, back to consumption. And I think one of the best ways to do that, again, is a lot of testing, a lot of data, a lot of information, so that you can allow people to get back to work safely, and that also gets the economy moving. So providing more jobs and providing more health security actually will go hand in hand as we go back. But you can't do that without the data and without the testing.
All right, very quickly, one final question. The IMF predicts that the world is heading to the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. I want to know, do you agree with that assessment, and why?
So I think at least for the second quarter, that's undoubtedly true. There's going to be an incredible contraction of economic activity. We'll see whether it's going to be true over the longer horizon. For the U.S., back in between 1929 and 1933, U.S. GDP fell by 30% over that whole time period. I don't think we're going to see that over a sustained time period in the U.S., but in the short run, yes, we will see that. We'll see that in other countries, and I think that's because we've never had a shock like this where people were told they can't go to work. People were told they can't go out and consume, and so we in some sense have imposed this on ourselves to try to preserve the healthcare system and preserve people's lives. We will then have to go to the next steps forward, as I said before, working together to preserve lives but also reopen the economy.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening, Professor Randall Kroszner. He's the Deputy Dean and Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.